Look, if you can make it over there.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to the New Ohio Theater. As we were just talking about, you actually on stage. This is also the audience. How many people have been here before? Just so I can get a sense. Yeah, a couple of people. Typically, the audience is here in risers, and our stage is there, and that's the performing area. People, if you've been to theater these days, nobody likes to do that anymore, so everybody likes to kind of create this immersive theater experience. And that's what they've done here. So they've converted our relatively straightforward proscenium, black box, to this cabaret set. This show is we call it Bedlam, and I recommend it to everybody. It's a play called New York Animals, and it's got music by Burt Bacharach. And it's actually original music. It's not a jukebox musical. They didn't pull a bunch of old songs. And yes, he is still alive. In case, I'm going to just take out a very brief span of the history of the New Ohio Theater. It actually, the New Ohio Theater was originally just called the Ohio Theater. It was in Soho. It was on Wooster Street. Now you're
I've been there.
Been to that?
I didn't know it was the same one.
It is the same theater. That was on Wooster Street, 66 Wooster, between Spring and Broome. And one of the first questions I always get is, why is it called the Ohio Theater, right? So that all begins at the beginning. The Ohio Theater was founded by two men, Bill Hahn and Charles Magistro, who bought that building on Wooster Street. Bill was an architect. Charles was a big fan of the arts. But they bought that building back when, for nothing, when nobody wanted to be in Soho. They loved the architecture of the building. But shortly after they bought it, Bill wanted a theater on the first floor. And Charles, who was from Ohio, was feeling homesick and was threatening to move back to Ohio. So Bill, in an effort to keep Charles in New York, named his theater the Ohio Theater. So it's a love story. It's the Ohio Theater.
Did he stay?
They stayed. And they've both passed now, but they were together for 65 years.
Wow.
So it worked. Called it the Ohio Theater. Charles stayed, and that's like the mid '80s when that happened, which was before me. So the Ohio Theater actually precedes my involvement with it, but that's the original story, and that's why it's called the Ohio Theater. It was a way to keep Charles Magistro in New York. I showed up on the scene about 1987. I just arrived to New York from London, where I was living and doing theater, and I was sleeping on a guy's couch on the Upper West Side, Jim Ingalls, and he got a phone call, and he's from people who had found this theater sitting dormant in Soho. And the reason it was dormant, it had been closed by the fire department, because they were doing a show, and they filled this huge warehouse space with dead branches and dirt all over. And the fire department caught wind of that and shut them down. So it was kind of closed for a little while. Bill and Charles got everything up to speed. They took care of the tickets. Well, they didn't, so I'll follow that later. But brought everything back up to speed. And so there's a company called Project 3. They were reopening the space. They were looking for a production manager, and they called the guy's apartment where I was on the couch, and he said, we're looking for a production manager, and he said, hey, this guy sitting on my couch could do that. And so he sent me down, and that's how I first walked into the Ohio Theater, and ended up working as a production manager on that show. So we reopened the dormant Ohio Theater. We love the space. You're going to see some pictures of it in a second. We have a little short video we're going to show. But I love the space. We had a very successful time there, and I met Bill Hahn. That's how I met Bill. And I said, Bill, who's running your theater? And he said, well, nobody's really running it right now. And I said, hey, I'll run it. I'd only been in New York about a month at this point. And he said, okay, well, let's try it for a year. And we shook hands, and that was in 1988. And I didn't leave that building until about 22 years later, off of that handshake, until they eventually sold the building, which I'll get to later. So that's kind of the founding story of how I actually got involved with the Ohio Theater. It was a handshake with Paul. During those entire 22 years, there was never a lease. There was never a contract. We never signed anything. So it's really kind of old school. We were the last bohemian enterprise in Soho by the time we left. But it was really that kind of, it was in New York that, at least in Manhattan, it doesn't exist anymore, where you would just kind of make that kind of handshake. And 22 years later, it was still in effect. So, of course, I'm very fond of Bill and Charlotte. So that's how we got. That's kind of how we got started. Now, if I say the New York independent theater scene, would people have an idea of what that means?
Yeah. Yes.
It used to be called Off-Broadway, right?
Yeah.
And now we don't call it Off-Broadway because that suggests some kind of relationship to Broadway. And actually, we're just doing our own thing down here. We're not really trying to move things to Broadway. We're just doing our work. So we call it the independent theater scene, and what that means is just all these theater companies in New York. At any given moment, there's like 300 independent theaters in New York. Companies either with legal 501c3s or not, making work in New York, and that don't have a permanent home. So our mission, all the way back in 1988. And is actually as true today, it hasn't really changed, is we try to nurture, promote, and commission and develop new work for the American theater with these independent theaters. And that's what we were doing then, that's what we're doing now. I should mention, I'm also a playwright and a director. So that was my personal way into it. I wanted a theater where I could do some of my plays, and we did a lot of my plays there. Some of which I directed, some of them I directed. But so that was the mission then. That's the mission now. We
So,
Yeah.
can I ask questions, or?
take a question.
So would you say you're a producing organization or a presenting organization or both?
Well, it's evolved actually. More when we were in Soho, we were producing more. And then presenting, just for people, the distinction we're making is whether you're 100%, the show is all yours, or whether it's a company that comes to you with a show, and you say, yeah, we'll present it in the theater, usually for a split of the box or some kind of, agreed on thing. So when we were in Soho, we were more of a mix. And again, when kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but when we moved here, there was a kind of semi-traumatic transition that got us here, and so since we've been here, it's really been more of a presenting organization. But we are kind of moving back into producing. So just kind of give the landscape at the time. I guess you guys all look like you've been in New York for a while, so you know all this. One of our flagship programs is called Ice Factory. It's our summer festival in New York. We've been doing it for 23 years. So that was one of the early programs we set up there back in, I guess, 94. At that time in New York, there was no summer theater. There wasn't Lincoln Center, there wasn't the Fringe, there wasn't, and all the festivals, all the madhouses of the summer. None of that actually existed. So in a way, we invented summer theater. We did it because the space was empty, there was nothing happening, we had a bunch of artists hanging out, and we kind of realized not everybody goes to Bridgehampton for the summer in the city, and so we launched Ice Factory in '94. I think we did it for 3 weeks at that time, now we do it 7 weeks. But it was complete, we had no idea if it was going to work or not, there were no models, there were no other festivals happening. And so we tried it, and there were a lot of people came. And so that launched Ice Factory, which we do to this day, 23 years later, in a completely different landscape. And if any of you see theater in the summer. But you should come here and see it. We were kind of famous, Ice Factory was famous in the summer because we didn't have air conditioning in the other space. And so we were kind of famous for how hot our theater was, and especially under theatrical lighting. And somehow that became this weird badge of honor, like how badly do you want to see theater if you can go sit in a 100-degree theater and sweat through your shirt because you want to be there. And somehow we built an entire summer festival off of that, I think, and it worked.
And did you think naming it Ice Factory was going to help make people feel cooler?
Yes. It's totally ironic, consciously self-reference to how uncool it was in that. So that's exactly what I'm going to look at my notes here. So that's kind of Ice Factory, and again, that's to this day. Just drop in, I'm just going to drop in different points, I guess, because there's so many years ago. I can start talking about, like, this company was there, and this company was there, and these artists were there. I don't know how many of those, so I'm not going to do that. You can go to our website. We've had, Tony Kushner was there, Ann Bogart was there, Elevator Repair Service was there, Stimmers was there. There's a lot of people who either are still creating work for the theater or came and went, but most of them came to our space. But rather than me just run off through a list, I'm going to you can go to our website. You can hit history, and it's all there. So if you really want to look at it, I thought I would share instead. One of the things it was a beloved space, partly because it was falling down. It had never been renovated, so it was essentially falling down around our ears the whole time we were there. Again, somehow that was part of its charm. People liked it, being part of that scene, and people always talked about the ghost, that there were all these good ghosts. So I thought I would share a ghost story.
I just need to ask one question, but this was in a building that was owned by an architect?
It was, but they had no money.
Okay.
So they were building rich but cash poor.
Okay.
So so everything was just hanging on by a thread for the whole time, actually. And probably, I often said, in terms of the revenue that they gave up by keeping us in that space, probably made it one of the great philanthropists here at Downtown Theater. In terms of lost income, had they turned that space into something else 10 or 15 years earlier. But no, they never had, there was no money. There was this beautiful old building that was going to fall down. But I thought I would share this ghost story because people talk so much about, like, oh, there's good spirits. Everybody talked about the good spirits, the good ghosts that were in the theater. There was a show, a friend of mine, Michael Ratomsky, wrote a show called Gutter Sparrow, and it was about Edith Piaf. And he wrote specifically for an actress to play Edith, who was also a friend of mine. So it was kind of an in-house thing we were presenting. And he had AIDS, and as he was beginning the rehearsal process, he was getting sicker and sicker, and eventually he couldn't continue with that process. So he asked me to step in and continue as the director and dramaturg of the text with Graziella. And in the course of that rehearsal, he died. And so you can imagine, it's a very emotional production, and rehearsals were very emotional. And so finally, we get to opening night, and unbeknownst to any of us, his sister comes to the theater for opening night with his ashes.
Oh, gosh.
And says, it's like 5 minutes before the show, it's 10 minutes before the show. And she comes backstage and she says, oh, I wanted to give these ashes to Graziella, the performer who's about to come. And fortunately, she ran into the stage manager first. And the stage manager said, oh, great, you know what, I'll give those to her, just give those to me, and we'll give those to Graziella, after the show, which obviously makes sense. So the stage manager, who's also a friend of mine, took the ashes up to the booth and sat there and called and ran the entire show with Michael's ashes on her laps. No, but we didn't know this, the audience didn't know this. And then at one point in the middle of the show, there was a scene where she's kind of in a church, and we had a candle inside of a glass bowl, and that thing was lit. And for whatever reason, that candle started to flicker in this crazy, crazy way. And everybody, even as I talk about it now, actually, because everybody in the theater understood that that was Michael. It just made his presence known in the middle of the show. And again, so we're all like, we have this moment, we're all like, oh my God, that was unbelievable. Graziella was on stage, almost freaking out. And we get off, and we find out that his ashes are actually in the booth, and that the sister was there, and that actually Michael was with us. And so there was a whole house full of people who were pretty convinced that Director Michael had visited us in the middle of that show. So that's one example. There's more, but that's like one example of an old Ohio theater ghost story. Kind of good spirits that haunted that space. I'm just kind of jumping around now. You know, that kind of takes us almost to 9/11, which was another big traumatic event. Of course, everything, if you remember, you know, everything below Houston Street was originally closed. So we're below Houston Street on the street. So they shut that neighborhood. By this time, I'm living in this building, by the way. I had a little apartment on the 3rd floor with Bill and Charles. I was the super. But the whole neighborhood's cut off, and we were about to open a show called The Holy Mother of Haley, New York. And it was a show about community by New Georges. I don't know if any of you know that company. They're still around, a great company. Directed by Rachel Dixon, who's also still around doing great work. But they shut down the neighborhood, and nobody could come into the neighborhood, so we had to, do a show, obviously on Tuesday, on Wednesday. But on Friday, they moved the boundary from Houston Street to Canal, which opened up the neighborhood, opened up our theater, and we had to make a decision like what we're going to do. And so we gathered the cast together and the designers and everybody in the theater, and sat in a circle and talked about what we were experiencing, and made a decision like we wanted, can't let the terrorists win. So we decided to do a show. So by that Friday, we reopened the theater, and we had a small house that we met out in front. So we had the audience meet out front, and we kind of had a little candle ritual there. And there's still, so the smoke is still, in the air. And the Wooster group, who you probably heard about, we're also on Wooster. We were between Spring and Broome. They were between Broome and Grand. So they're just the next block down. They saw something happening in front of our theater. We knew them as neighbors. And so they all came walking down the street, and this is William Defoe and Mr. And joined our ritual, and we kind of had this great, really beautiful little ritual on the street, on Wooster Street, before our performance. And then we brought everybody into the theater, and we performed that show. I'm just hopping, as you can hear, these are my like personal stories about this. That was kind of one of those moments that really stays with you, of course. And kind of bonded us to the Wooster Street. That happened. Now we're kind of, in 2002, a couple of things happened. One, Bloomberg was trying to clear up all the old tickets, all the old fines and things like that, and it turned out that the original fine, remember the branches and the dirt that were in the theater, that closed the theater, apparently that was still an open thing. So we got a call from the fire department. They wanted to close this thing down, but it meant they had to come and do an inspection on the theater. So we're like, okay, when do you want to do that? And so like, how about, Friday? And the thing is, the irony of this, so this is what, 12 years or something odd years later. The irony of this is we're doing this play by Coltez, and it had dead branches and dirt on the floor. And so they sent us the original violation, and it said dead branches and dirt. And so they were going to come in 15 years later, just by coincidence. Now, it wasn't, we didn't fill the whole space up, but it was still dirt and dead branches. So I guess that's a motif that theater people like. And we had to, so in order for them to come in to clear this, we had to take all the branches, we put them in the basement, swept up all the dirt, put all the dirt in bags. We brought the fire department in, they walked through the space, they said, okay, great, you guys are back open officially. They left literally 5 minutes after they left, with all the dirt in the space, and went on to continue that show. It's just, that was just one of those kind of great, ironic moments of production. The other thing that happened that year is we got our first Village Voice Obie for Ice Cream. So that's the summer festival I was talking about, so now we're kind of well into that run, and we got our first Obie for that festival as for sustained excellence. So that was kind of a big deal and a big marker for us, and that all happened around 2002. Jumping ahead, just, meanwhile, we're just doing theater like crazy, basically. We're just basically running this theater 50 weeks a year. The show always in. At that time in that building, we also had the 6th floor, so we had a rehearsal space. We were rehearsing upstairs, we were going downstairs, just like a mighty river kind of theater that kept going. But one of my personal highlights, in my experience there, was a company called Untitled Theater Company did a Havel festival. Václav Havel, you guys know who that is, the Czechoslovakian playwright and president, right? Great champion of democracy and human rights. Went from being held in jail in Czechoslovakia to becoming the president of Czechoslovakia. He was a dissident playwright and became the president. Led the Velvet Revolution that overthrew communism. This company was doing a festival of all of his plays in New York, and we were one of the venues, we were one of the partners on this festival. And so he's got maybe 30 plays, let's say 5 or 6 of them which are happening in our theater. And he was actually, Václav Havel was in residency at Columbia at the time of the festival. And so, as it turned out, he was really into this idea of this festival. And he came down and met him and showed him the theater, and he loved the theater. He started reminding him of all the old theaters in town. He started funky, run down theaters. We were so happy. And for about a week, Václav Havel just hung out at the Ohio Theater, seeing shows, coming in, hanging out at the bar afterwards. I just remember one time I was at the concessions, and I was like, hey, let me buy you a beer. And he's like, thanks. He says, yeah, I'm working on this play, and I'm really having a hard time. And he starts talking to me about this play he's doing. I'm thinking, this is a conversation I've had with 100 playwrights, only I'm actually having the same conversation with Václav Havel. This unbelievable international figure. I directed one of the shows, one of his shows. He came to see it with his wife and his bodyguards, because he always traveled with bodyguards. And we ended up going to Joe's Pub, where there was a Velvet Underground cover band, because he was really into the Velvet Underground. Anyway, it was a week of Václav Havel hanging out at the theater. You'll see a picture in this video we're going to show, but that was just a personal highlight, because he was such an important person in my thinking independent media. Is this working? I'm just running through all these things. Everyone's listening, everyone's still listening. Yeah, well, we're getting actually near the end here. So, 2009, Phil and Charles are now getting pretty old. Bill's in his late 80s, Charles is in his late 70s. The building is really falling down around us, and their cash, the money is gone, and they have to sell it. So they did. They sold it to a company called Czar Properties, and that was a very traumatic time, as you can imagine. And it was a little education for me about how I lived in this little bubble, inside of this like artistic little bubble with these strange, totally eccentric landlords who just wanted the theater to be there, to commercial real estate developers who just said, let's square footage, how much is it worth, we're paying, whatever we were paying a month, they wanted 10 times that. Somehow we negotiated, they sold it in the middle of the season, somehow I got them to agree to let us finish the season before they threw us out, so that we could kind of walk out with a little bit of dignity. And then somehow we got another year out of it. So we had this kind of long, slow, painful death there.
While the building was in contract, or?
No, they took it over, but they just didn't, they were dealing with other things, and we were paying something, and, but there was no long-term strategy. They were just kind of, they did, I think they tripled the rent, so somehow I was moving money around just to keep the place going. But I was also scrambling because I needed another space, right? So I was buying time, and as long as we could buy time, we keep the theater going. But this was a very public event, so people knew about it, and so now they're beloved. Wow, the theater is closing, and people rallied around it. How can we save it? We dealt with the city council, we dealt with a lot of people, but ultimately it's like, look, this guy owns this building, and he can do whatever he wants with it. So that was the end. That was the end of it. So at the end of Ice Factory, in the recurring Ice Factory, it was August 2010. We did our final show there. It was a play that I wrote called Nostradamus Predicts the Death of Soho. And it was not really about that. It was really about that, but it was not literally about that. It was about some other story, but it was very much, and it was staged in a very site-specific way. It involved across the street, there was a storefront. We had actors inside the storefront window. And part of the play. So it was kind of this final love letter, essentially, to the theater and the closing. And then we had a massive party after the last show of that, and that was it. So that was 2010, like August 2010. That was the last show. And the last show that I did in New York. So at that point, we're essentially in free fall. We have there's not another space in the works. And the guy who really threw out the lifeline to me, I don't know if you know Three-Legged Dog, that theater? They're down actually close to the threw out a lifeline, say, hey, I got an extra desk in my office. You want to come into residency with us? And I was like, yeah. And what that did, and I'll always appreciate him for doing this, is it allowed us to keep the story going, because everybody's like, hey, what's next? What are you going to do next? And I was like, I don't know. So suddenly I was able to say, oh, we're going into residency at 3LD. And suddenly there was a story. There was like a continuing narrative. And I didn't know where it was going to go. But that gesture actually led us to here. I'm going to stop here for a second. At that point, when we were in free fall, we didn't know what the future was. We had something at CUNY Brad Center, they do those things up there. And they did one in the Ohio Theater. And so we put together this little video. It's like 20, it's very cool. It's not, it's a quick scan of everything I was just talking about. You'll be able to identify it.
So you're going to see my desktop here. Oh, there it is.
That's the outside.
Don't have better.
Professional theater folks, Hoffman, New York AD. That was the event.
That's where you did here?
That's where Philip. Barn doors that we would hang out after every show that opened up into the street. David Greenspan. First Obie. That's the rock and power player there. There it is. Song just got a National Theater Award from Obama. That's my daughter. The last party. Call ourselves Ohio right after that.
Oh.
That's great.
So you get a sense of, that's the kind of theater we did. You have to get a sense of something. Mark, how much should I go into archive building stuff? Because I know you're, I've been up here too long.
No.
Well, you can come after me if I.
I'll just talk about how we got here. So at the time we were in residency at 3LD, we did our ice factory there, so we never missed a year of ice factory in 23 years, which is, for whatever reason, was very important to me. And, but during that same time, so we left, we moved out of the theater August 2010, we moved into residency at 3LD, and that following year, this space became available. It was a theater, it was called Wings Theater, but it didn't look anything like this. And they had been in here for 20 years, and you know, they had kind of, it was a little bit of a pat-back theater. And, but they left that same year just because of the timing. And this space became available. It's a rent-controlled space because in order for the archive building to develop the rest of the building commercially, the city of New York, and this is the model that they just have to do over and over again if they want theater in Manhattan or theater in Brooklyn anymore. They had to set aside certain amount of space for not-for-profits at a reasonable price. And so that was this space. And they put out applications for citywide applications. And
Who did? So.
Rock Rose Development.
Okay.
So that's the company that owns this building and owns lots of buildings.
And had you already decided that you wanted to be in the village, or like how were you narrowing your search to be?
That would be a mischaracterization of what's happening. We were just kind of, so remember, we're just landing, we just moved out and moved into this desk in 3LD. Gave away most of the things we had, although we kept our seats and some lights, so I guess we had some idea.
What, like in storage?
At 3LD, in storage at this theater. So we had our inventory to theirs while we were there.
But could you,
No, go ahead.
To me, this is very interesting, and it actually has a wider impact as to like why you're here. and-
Right.
So you had a residency with a cooperative with another theater space, and you were able to produce your series there. So, but you
How do
decided that you needed to have your, no, the ice factory, that's
Right.
really a dog. So, but you decided you wanted to have your own space again. I'm just curious about like, that came from your board, came from the audience, it came from you, or?
Well, it really came from Rock Rose in a certain way. We did, I mean, just to get the timeline straight, so we leave in August, we move into 3LD. We don't do Ice Factory until the next year, right? But in the course of that year that we were there, shortly after, a couple months later, this space became available. And there was an application process, and so they sent out applications, people, citywide applications. But of course, we had this very compelling proposal. We had this high-profile closing of this space, and all this, the community had rallied behind it. It was, New York Times articles. We were all over the papers. It was all about the end of an era, da-da-da-da.
And some Obies.
And so a couple of Obies, right. And so I met Patricia Dunphy, who was the representative from Rock Rose. And it was very strange. It was remarkable, the situation, in that she was great, and I was, I said, "Here, look, here's my story. Here's this. This is what just happened." And I said, "So, if you want to be the hero of this story, we're it. And if you do this, we'll publicize you as the hero of, saving the Ohio theater." And of course, that appealed to her. And there was very little. There wasn't a peer review. I was pretty much. I met with her once. She wanted me to meet again with somebody else. And within 4 weeks, she offered me the space. And so it wasn't like there was a big search going on for another space. We hadn't really gotten that far. I was personally kind of convinced that I was not going to, God bless Brooklyn, but I wasn't going to Bush. I'd already done that. When I moved into Soho, I was mugged in front of the theater. So I had already done the outer edge, only that was Soho at that time. And I wasn't really, I thought, okay, I'm done, but I'm not really looking to open Bushwick or somewhere else. And I love Bushwick. I go there all the time. Bushwick stars.
You consider Ohio?
What's that? I think they already have a theater named Ohio Theater, so that wasn't. And no, but so it happened very quickly. So within a month, we applied. I had 2 meetings. I pitched them that they could be the hero of this sad story, and they said great. And we negotiated the contract and then took over the space. And what we did was we gutted it completely and rehung the grid. There was no, ironically, there was no heating or air conditioning in this space. And I figured, okay, that's not going to really transfer at this point. So we took out a loan through Rock Rose. Actually, they helped us do this. And we put in heating and air conditioning. We redid the dressing rooms. We put in a sprung floor. We built risers. And essentially just reconfigured the whole space. Not to what you see right now, because this is kind of a unique situation. So then we did and that was all happening while we were doing Ice Factory at 3LD. So that summer we did that Ice Factory at 3LD while we were in here renovating this space. And in October of 2011, we reopened this space. And so it had actually been only about 14 months from the time we left the old space to the time we reopened this, which is just kind of crazy set of circumstances that allowed that to happen. Does that help? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm just very interested because you're here. That's
We're
a
here,
real success story.
Somehow we're here. Yeah. So we got here, and because you saw that old space, it was so iconic that I really didn't feel like I could call this the Ohio Theater because people had such an image in their mind, and I didn't want that. I had to acknowledge that was over. So we called it the New Ohio Theater. And it helps us talk about our history because we talk about the old Ohio Theater and the new Ohio Theater, and that's how we got here. And I think that's enough for me for tonight.
How many is this normally? Not this,
It's 75 CP.
that's nice size.
All right, so I'm gonna give it up to Mark, and he's gonna tell you about what we've been doing since we've been here. And I'll just say, in January, I have a new play called Death of the Little Class that will be happening here, and that'll be the first play I've done since the last play that happened in the last space. So it took that long to kind of make this transition and reestablish and kind of stabilize, and I'm happy to be back writing plays again and producing them with you. So if you're around in January 25th it opens, and look for us and to see you there. Or in any
That was really lovely. Because I joined the organization in February of 2011 as we were getting ready to do that Ice Factory in 3LD. So I had seen some shows at the Old Ohio, just as a theater artist, young theater artist, but I hadn't heard a lot of those stories. It was really nice actually to hear the stories. So what I want to do now is not just talk a little bit about what we're doing now, but also give you a little bit more of a story of the building itself, because this is the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation, and also the special circumstances that led to us talking with Rockrose. Like, where did Rockrose come from in a sense to this building? Now I know that I have some other guests to the building here today. We have the tap dance, American tap dance is here from the second floor. So we're excited to have you all. And I know that there may be anybody here who lived through all of this in the 80s and 90s, so So if I say something that's wrong, let me know. But this is my understanding. And obviously there's good and there's bad to all sides of this, but we're going to talk about the good tonight. So this is the archive building. I didn't take this photo, I got this off the internet. I don't know exactly when it was taken, but it was clearly taken some time ago, because if you really look at those buildings, some of those probably don't exist anymore. That is the building. It takes up one city block. It was at the time of its building the largest structure in Greenwich Village. They didn't really call it the West Village at that time, right? So in all of Greenwich Village, it was the largest structure. We'll talk a little more about that. Okay, so this is just a basic timeline. Some of this stuff we'll cover. 1892 to 1899. So that's when it's designed and built. Then it was repurposed and it had its life, sort of its heyday in the early to mid 20th century. Then it was converted to private development, so that's the whole Rockrose story. It's totally fascinating. I will try not to butcher that. And then the new Ohio moves in, which is really, that's what we care about. that's the important part. Okay. All right, so I just want to, I love this. This is an aerial view of the archive building. It's a little unclear, but you'll notice that it's this weird trapezoid, irregularly trapezoidal shaped building in the center. It's bounded by Christopher Street to the north, and that's Barrow Street to the south. And then Washington Street to the west, and Greenwich Street to the east. So that gives it, that's how you can get its trapezoidal shape. And then I just want to call attention to this big square in the center, because that is not original to the building. It was, and we'll talk about this, it was a warehouse. The federal government built it, and so it was took up the 400,000 square feet, took up the whole block. When it was converted by Rockrose, they needed sunlight and ventilation, so they carved out the atrium.
The government built it for what? A warehouse for what?
That's an excellent question. We're going to talk about it. It had multiple uses.
Okay.
No, that's great. The short answer is it changed over time. But it's an excellent question because I believe that is my next slide. Okay. And forgive me, I know Robert is really good at telling stories. He's more the artist guy. I'm more the data guy. And so every organization needs both. So I like having slides. So in 1892, it was designed to be the U.S. Appraiser's warehouse. Okay, so that means it collected customs and tariff assessment for all these goods that were coming into the New York Harbor on Christopher Street. And what's interesting is that the customs house was down in Battery Park. Yeah. And the federal government said, okay, we're going to put the appraiser's warehouse down by the customs building, right? That's what you would think you would do. Except that the sailors, the merchants, right, they said, wait a second, you mean you want a parade of carts going from Christopher Street all the way down to Battery Park. That's crazy. And they actually decided to put it down by the customs. There was a big protest and sort of a lot of upheaval, and so they decided, in fact, to build it where they built it here. So that's why we are, by the river, by the piers, where the cargo was coming off. And the customs and tariff assessment is important because that, at the time, this is before the income tax, federal income tax exists. So this is the primary means that the government has at the moment, the federal government has, for generating income. So this was really important. All right, so the design is credited to Willoughby J. Edinburgh. Love that name. He was the supervising architect of the U.S. Treasury. And even though it had the title supervising architect, he is credited with the plans for this building. But he leaves after about 2 years. So the succeeding supervisory architect is William Martin Aiken, who also designed, I believe, the Philadelphia Mint, definitely. I think also maybe the Denver Mint. Okay. But then he leaves after about 3 years, and finally James Knox Taylor takes it over, and he actually stays the supervisory architect for the U.S. Treasury all the way into the 1920s. And he really believes in being the supervisory architect. So he was the supervisory architect for example, the James Farley Post Office. He's not McKinley and White, but he's the supervisory architect. And he, in those 20-odd years that he's there in that position, he's like overseeing a lot of government buildings. And this Romanesque revival. I am by no means an architect, but I thought it was important to say that. Romanesque revival sort of starts to take off around the same time actually as Beaux-Arts. And Beaux-Arts really sort of takes it over. But the hallmark of Romanesque revival, certainly one of the hallmarks, are these big, this big stately ground, these arches. And so you'll see there's arch after arch. Actually, there's arches down at the bottom, but that's part of the renovation for retail. But there's those arches, and then there's arches, and those arches, and then those arches up at the top. So that's a hallmark of the Romanesque revival, and it's brick. All right, so now what happens is, a mere 14 years later, in 1913, what happens? The U.S. government passes the federal income tax laws. And now all of a sudden, customs and tariffs are not nearly as important for the income for the U.S. government. So somewhere after 1913, it's 10 acres. We're on 10 acres. And they said, well, we're not going to give up those 10 acres. We're just going to turn it into a warehouse, and we're going to call it the U.S. Federal Building. And I can't quite exactly figure out what they put in that warehouse, but it was a lot of stuff. I'm sure the federal government has a lot of stuff. Desks. Lots and lots of desks. Okay. But in the 1930s, once the Depression hits, they remodel it, and they call it the National Archives Record Center. So among other things, they have tax records. And government generates a lot of paper. So now this is why we call it the archive building, because it had this history starting in the Depression as an archive building. There's also a post office and other government agencies. Okay, so that's what happens in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. And then, in 1965, as Penn Station is being still, it's taken forever to rip Penn Station down, it's a traumatic experience in New York City history, they passed the Landmarks Preservation Act. And that's 1965, and so this is 1966. This is called the New York City Landmark, and it's placed on the National Register of Historic Places. So now it's this protected building, thank goodness, except soon after that, the government decides to move all of its archives over to New Jersey. That's what people do, right? They're constantly living in New York. And it's like a one-level structure, and I actually don't know if it's there anymore now, but they moved to New Jersey. And now we have this building. What do we do with this building? It's a historic landmark. So, and of course the 70s in New York, and this is, I only just started to live through this, it's bankrupt, basically, right? It's not a great place to be if you're looking for a certain kind of thing. New York City in the 70s is not a great place to be. Certainly not the West Village was not the hotbed of interest that it was now. Again, if you're talking about a certain kind of thing. So the city doesn't know what to do. The federal government doesn't know what to do. And in 1973, and I didn't put this up here, but the New York Landmarks Conservancy is created. And they were created as a not-for-profit, a lot of the same people that created the Landmarks Act, that lobbied for the Landmarks Act, created the Landmarks Commission, and they want to take care of these buildings. So in 1975, this building is totally empty. And the Government Services Agency talks to the Landmarks Conservancy and says, can you tell us what to do with this building? And they actually thought that it would be a not-for-profit institution for renovating buildings. And the research I did said, a notion which faded after their experience with the archive building. So this was maybe their one and only, in a sense, attempt to really develop it. And, okay, so they talked to Columbia University. They say, Columbia University, you have an architecture school, what should we do with this building? And what they noticed was a small change to the Government Surplus Act, which doesn't exist anymore, which said that you could, the federal government could give national monuments. They could give monuments to local agencies if the agency agreed. It could even be for for-profit use, as long as the money generated went to historic preservation. So Columbia said, that's it, that's your answer. So they worked out this complicated agreement. I should figure out my next slide. Great, so that's the historic properties fund. So we'll talk about that. So they worked out, so that brings us to the historic properties fund, right? So it takes a bunch of years to work this all out. And what they said was, anybody heard of the historic properties fund? Because I mean, I have a feeling it's, yeah, so this is interesting, because I thought maybe I was the only one who hadn't heard of it. So this still exists. And it was created by the Experience with the Archive building. It was the largest and, at the time, the single greatest contributor to the historic properties fund. So what happened was the government gave it to the city, and the city leased it to developers. The developers agreed that, because now this is for-profit money that's being generated, they agreed to make a one-time payment of almost like $6 million, basically, and then ongoing payments to this, what they called the Historic Properties Fund, and the Landmarks Conservancy was going to operate it, and they still operate it to this day. And the first one was made in 1983, the Washington Square United Methodist Church, which is apparently not that far away from the West Village. And they had some plaster falling down, they had some stone stuff, and they renovated it. Right? And over the years, 240 buildings have been assisted. It's still growing because it still exists. And I found a statistic, this was back in like 2005, that at that time it was almost over $12 million had been given to various things. And if you have a historic building, you can actually still apply for this fund. And so that really becomes this, it's a nice living legacy here. Now that law has since been repealed, so I don't know about the donating the buildings to the city, whatever. But, so, in 1982, that is when the developers, the city, and the Landmarks Conservancy all entered into this tripartite agreement to create this fund. Okay, so what about the archive? I can get pretty granular. So Rockrose started it. But Rockrose didn't actually have the political will, they didn't have the political savvy at the time to get it through, and there was a lot of protests and stuff. So then they talked to a developer, Titlebound. Titlebound had recently had some success with renovation, with restoration and reclamation through conversions and stuff like that. So Titlebound gets it started, but Titlebound doesn't really have a lot of experience with large-scale residential projects, so ultimately they bring Rockrose back on. Okay. So, and then ultimately Rockrose bought out Titlebound. So Rockrose opens it in 1988. It took 6 years. 479 units, 242 floor plans. So because it's this irregular trapezoid, and because the floors are different heights, 242 floor plans. Some of which, many of which have 20-foot high ceilings, because they're one-bedroom lofts, and they're not just regular, whatever, 10-foot ceilings that you've lofted. It's actually 20-foot ceilings that you've lofted, so you're really looking over it. It's quite amazing. Now, it is the largest residential conversion in New York City history, certainly at the time, and I didn't believe that, so I was like, wait a minute, what about the West Beth? But no, the West Beth only has 383 units. So we are technically the largest conversion. And lastly, I mentioned the interior atrium was carved out. They had to do that. But then again, as Robert mentioned, that part of this fund was that they had to keep it for public use. And so they carved out this separate entrance and these 3 floors for public use, in addition to the donations to the Historic Properties Funds. And they had rental protections. So initially, they were getting tax breaks from the city, and they also had rent stabilization. Now that does not exist anymore. I know that's why I say if anybody lived through that, that was quite a dramatic
Meaning
experience.
some was rent stabilized or all of it was?
I believe, it's my understanding that the entire building at the time was rent. I don't know, which one's the one that's not the most restrictive.
Stabilized.
Stabilized is not the most
Control
restrictive.
is the most.
That's correct. So my understanding was rent stabilized, because they were getting tax breaks from the city. And so they said, okay, then you have to have it stabilized. And that ran out in about 2009-ish. And that was a very traumatic time. So I'm not going to lie about that. But they are now at market rates. And famous people who have lived here. My understanding, Jennifer Connelly, the actress Jennifer Connelly was here. Famously, right, Monica Lewinsky was here. I won't say who's here now. I can't even say for sure who's here now. But there's a lot of rumors floating around. But it's a very nice building. And I just want to point out that the entrance on Greenwich Street, we're 154 Christopher, their entrance is 666 Greenwich. Now, forget the obvious association with 666 Greenwich. We were 66 Wooster. So I just think it's 66 Wooster, now we're 66.
Do you know anything about the rent stabilized? Did they just overnight, people who rent stabilized, that was the end of it?
So I am, again, not a legal thing. My understanding, and I just read this from the Times, and you can't always trust the Times, but my understanding is that you have to give notice. You have to, when you sign someone to a lease, and you know that those restrictions are going to go up, you have to tell them how long it's going to last for. But how long it lasts for is subject to market conditions, number of properties that are available. It's subject to a whole host of things. What happened was it suddenly shrank, and so they said, okay, the protections are going away. And then some people sued, and they said, well, you told us it was going to be longer, and they said, well, it's not up to us because blah blah blah. And so some people sued, and blah blah blah. So whatever. But that's several years ago. So my understanding is all of that's been resolved, and it's no longer restored. Yeah, and that's pretty typical. I mean, what they got was not any different than what other people have gotten. Landlords have gotten. So there you go. This is our building from the river. Again, I did not take this photo, although I have taken similar photos like this. I just thought it was quite clear. Again, it's probably not so recent because all that's but you get a good look at how big it is exactly. It's residential. So, so this really stands as, it's in marked contrast to what happened to us in Soho. Because in Soho, there were no protections. And it was really just a private transaction. And, everyone was in their rights to do what they did, but it meant that the artists got some stuff. And so we're very fortunate that here, there's this private city artistic partnership happening. We are beneficiaries of that, and we're very fortunate that. I do want to just give a shout out to the Wings Theater that was here for virtually the same time that Robert was talking about. So he comes into Wooster, he said in 1987, this was originally a theater, and it was the Wings Theater. And at least for many years, they were doing original gay plays, musicals, well, because certainly that in the neighborhood, that was what they were playing to, and they were a big service to their community, and they lasted till 2010. And I have some pictures of the renovation which kind of hint at what it was, but the stage was 2 feet off the ground, and the risers were just on the ground, so they were looking up at the stage. Whereas what we've done is we dropped the stage, and we raised the risers. Which is strange, because obviously sometimes people raise the stage back up, but at least you have a choice now. So this is what it looked like. So we actually didn't take photos of it before we ripped everything out. But this was a sloped concrete, and it was risers. It was like metal risers, like real, honest to God, like permanent seating. And then you can see that this was 2 feet off the ground, and it wrapped around a little bit, so that there were these like tendrils that came up to the side. And then you'll notice the big thing you can't notice it because you don't see them here. You'll see them. We have these column bases. The reason they chose 2 feet was because they covered over the column bases. And later on, if you sort of wander around these mirrors, you'll see we've restored the original column bases. And then this will go down. And that's actually not the back wall you're looking at. That is 2 feet away from the back wall because that's where they stored everything. So we ripped out the storage and we pushed it to the back wall. Our storage is now on the walls. Now this is turned around. So this is, yes?
So were you familiar with the Wings Theater and the program? Did you kind of... So,
interesting question. By the time I came to New York, I remember the Wings more as a rental facility. So I never saw any original Wings programming. And a lot of my friends, and a lot of us, we used the Wings. We loved having the Wings. It was a nice space to do work. But in doing research for this and in doing research for New Ohio, I have Googled, I've looked on the internet for the Wings, and they have a long history. Of original musical programming. And every so often we still get a submission for the Wings. Someone says, Dear Wings Theater, we have this play, we'd love you to produce it. So, they certainly were integral in that, for a while they were important to their community. And I wanted to give them that honor. So this is the direction you're facing now, okay? And so you're on the stage now, you're facing And you're facing through a window, which we have ripped out part of it in so we can get to it. And also, you'll notice that this walkway went straight across the back, but that's the actual ramp that you walk down. So we turned it 90 degrees, so that you're walking down along the side, and then you're coming through. This is us putting in the stage. So the cement is actually steeply raked. So it's much higher here than it is down there. And what we did is we made sure that the stage was flat. So underneath you all, it goes down about 2 feet. And then these are the column bases that I was talking about. And that's the collar that they had built up to. So we've ripped everything flat. I believe that's on the lead. That's your daughter. Yeah, so that's Robert started the redhead up there. That's what the stage put in, and then the risers, and you'll see this nothing's painted yet. But again, this is what it looks like. It's basically this big open. And my understanding is that the distance between the columns from here to here is the same distance as it was at the old one. So we feel quite fortunate for that. And so you're looking at this before we had a chance to paint it. And then that was Robert on stage. Generally considered the end of the major portion of the music. So that's sort of our taking it over. And I just did want to, I know Robert talked about this a little bit, I did want to give you just a little sense of our programming, our past and our future. New Ohio Presents, so that's our presentation program, where we basically, everything we do is we raise money to make it as easy as possible for artists to come to our space. So whatever kind of support we are able to give them is in an effort to make it as easy for them to come to us so that we can present work to the community. And that's compromises the bulk of our programming to bring those companies in. We also have Ice Factory, which we've been doing for 20 years, which Robert spoke about. And our applications for Ice Factory will be in December. So we open in December, we choose by the end of March or so, and then it just keeps rolling. It's very exciting to be a part of it. Then the Archive Residency, so that's a new program that we've had, where we are now commissioning works. And we are giving them 2 years to develop space. And the reason we call it the Archive Residency is because we've partnered with IRT, which is on the 3rd floor of this building. So we do a sort of a party here every fall where we announce the 2 new companies, and they develop it up at IRT, and then they come back down here for Ice Factory. So they get to do a first round of the show at the end of that first year at Ice Factory. They get to do it in front of an audience, they get feedback, they get to keep working on it. They go back up to IRT, they develop it again, and they come back down at the end of 18 months, and they come to a world premiere presentation. So we actually just had our residency party. We announced 2 new companies in October. We have Pie Hole and Other Voices USA. And Other Voices actually is kind of interesting because they actually had done a show at the Old Ohio way back in 2009 and 10. And this is now the 3rd or 4th year of the residency. So we cycle two companies every year, so we're already on our 7th and 8th company. So we're really excited about this because the hardest thing to make art in the city, really anything really, is time and space. Time, money, and space. So we give them time, money, and space to develop this new work. So we're commissioning them. We're very excited about that. And then New Ohio Productions. So as Robert said, we haven't produced in a while because it's been enough to get us to this point. But we are starting up and producing again, and that will be with Robert's new play. It opens January 25th, so we'll let you all know about that. But that's very exciting that we're back to that. So we really feel like, this big arc starting in 2009, we really completed it, sort of completed this. And so just briefly, I wanted to just show you a few more pictures. This is February of 2012. It's one of our first really big sort of successes, and it introduced us to a company called the Mad Ones, called Samuel and Alistair, A Brief History of the Robot War. It was an alternate history. It took place in the future in Russia where the US had been wiped out by robots. It was really pretty amazing, and we were very excited to meet the Mad Ones. They became one of our first archive residency companies. It was really our experience with them where we said, we want to help you guys create a new show. And so 2 years later, we came up with The Essential Straight and Narrow, which was one of the 2 inaugural productions of the archive residency, and they built a half-realistic set of a motel room, and then the other half was like a sound stage, and they divided it in half, so that was kind of neat. And now the Mad Ones they're now in residency somewhere else, and we feel very lucky to have been with them, and now their careers on a steep trajectory. This is Mutilated. This was a very rarely produced play by Tennessee Williams. It had not been, in fact, done again since it had debuted on Broadway. This was back when Tennessee Williams was debuting on Broadway, but this is like the early 80s. This was some of his more non-realistic stuff. That's Penny Arcade, if you know Penny Arcade. And that is over there on the platform over there, that's Mink Stole from the John Waters movies. So we were very lucky to have that. It was a wonderful production, and now I believe they're doing it again now, different cast. They're doing it in New Orleans, so they're bringing it back to Tennessee's hometown. Golden Dragon, this is a company called Playco that we have worked with at the Old Ohio Theater, and we've worked again with them at the New Ohio Theater. I sort of love this set. You can't quite tell, but it's lifted off the ground. It's this big floating rectangle. And the set designer just won a MacArthur Genius Award, so that's kind of exciting. And so it speaks to our history and also just some of the cool things that you can do in this space. It really just floated. It was quite lovely. And then lastly, An Intimate Evening with Kai Ford Mary. So this was a show that we just did in Ice Factory this past summer. I mention it not only because it was a good show, but because we are bringing it back. They're revising it. So it's not a residency production, but they did it in Ice Factory. We got to know them as a company. We enjoyed their work. We said, would you like to continue revising it and come back to us? And so in March, for 2 weeks, at the end of March, I believe, they will be coming back. So we're very excited about it. We're always happy when we work with artists and continue that relationship and see how it's changed, how it's evolved over the intervening 6 months. And without having a home, without telling them in advance, they wouldn't be able to raise the money, they wouldn't be able to work on the show, they wouldn't necessarily know. They might put it in storage or they might not put it in storage, it might just wither on the vine. And so it's really nice to be able to give people 6 months notice and say, okay, you get to work on this, what are you going to do now? And that is it for me. So.
I'll just close by inviting you all. We have a program. These are out in the lobbies. Are you local? It's a free membership program for anybody who lives in the area or psychologically feels like you live in the area. It entitles you to discount tickets, free drinks. You get invited to special events like this, opening nights, talkbacks, things like that. So if you're interested in what you heard tonight, I would recommend you can, I think it's got the website here, you go to the website, you sign up, become a local, local, you get a really cool card to carry in your wallet, and it tells you some fun things. And I would just say, just to pick up on a little bit, you want to pick up one of these, this is actually, this ends with our current show, but there'll be another one of these coming out. If you want to receive this in the mail for winter, spring, you should also sign up on our mailing list out in the lobby. But if you want to find out about what's going on, that's this. This takes us into January. So there's lots of stuff in the lobby for you to play with. And I guess I would just say, just one thing you said that I just want to pick up on this. The philosophy all the way from the beginning to now is like we curate artists, and people have to propose specific projects. But what I've always been interested in is building long-term relationships with artists, and I'm interested in being interested in artists and having them tell me what they want to do. And so the whole philosophy of all these different programs, Ice Factory, the presenting, archive residency, is giving companies different ways that they can interact with us depending on what their project is, what our resources are, and everything. But so they can actually feel like they have a place in New York that they feel at home, and that is committing to them. And that's been the philosophy from 1987 until now. So it works for us, and hopefully